It all started on a quiet evening when a woman in her mid-40s pulled into a parking lot. Returning from a long day at work, she looked composed, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced challenges before. But as she stepped out of her sleek black car, the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser suddenly lit up behind her. Within moments, the situation shifted from ordinary to tense. A uniformed officer stepped out, his tone sharp and suspicious, and accused her of driving a stolen vehicle. The woman paused, stunned by the words, but kept her calm, because she knew exactly who she was and how wrong this officer truly was. The officer demanded proof, asking her questions with a mix of authority and assumption. He saw only what he wanted to see, a black woman behind the wheel of a nice car. What he didn't realize was that the person standing before him was not just anyone. She was a respected judge, someone who had spent her career upholding the law and fighting for justice inside the courtroom. But out here, on the street, none of her years of service seemed to matter in his eyes. Tension built as bystanders began to notice. Phones were quietly lifted, cameras ready to capture what might unfold. The judge's voice remained steady, reminding the officer that she had her identification and documents right there. But instead of listening, he pressed harder, his words growing more forceful, his doubts louder. It was a clash not just between two people, but between perception and truth, between power and dignity. For the judge, it wasn't just about proving ownership of the car, it was about the principle. She had dedicated her life to protecting rights, to ensuring fairness, and now she was facing the very type of unfair treatment she had worked against for years. What the officer didn't know was that this confrontation was about to change everything. His career, his reputation, and the way people viewed him would never be the same once the truth came out. The parking lot, once quiet, had now become a stage where justice itself was being tested. The officer stood firm in his accusation, convinced he was in control. But the judge knew something he didn't. That one wrong move, one more step out of line, could unravel his authority in a way he never imagined, and in just a matter of minutes, everything he thought he controlled would slip through his hands. The tables were about to turn, but in a way no one watching could have predicted. The officer tightened his grip on his flashlight, circling the car as if searching for evidence that would prove his suspicion. His voice grew firmer as he asked, again for proof of ownership, not just once, but several times, almost as if he couldn't believe her quiet confidence. The woman, standing tall, calmly opened her purse and reached for her wallet, knowing that every move she made was being scrutinized. The onlookers watched closely, sensing that something unusual was unfolding right in front of them. What the crowd didn't know was the weight of this moment for her. Behind the calm exterior was a history of trials she had faced as a black woman in the legal world. She had risen from humble beginnings, working harder than most, often questioned for her place in courtrooms filled with doubt. Yet she had proved herself repeatedly, earning respect, and finally the honorable title of judge. But here, none of her achievements seemed to matter. To the officer, she was simply a suspect in his eyes. And that silent truth cut deeper than his words. The officer's radio crackled as he called in the car's plates. His jaw was tight, his expression certain, like someone who believed the system would back him up. Each second felt longer than the last. The woman stayed composed, but her mind was racing. She thought about the irony of it all, how she had spent years ensuring officers were held accountable for their actions, and now she stood at the receiving end of one's unchecked authority. Meanwhile, the murmurs among the bystanders grew. A few whispered that it didn't make sense, she didn't look like someone driving a stolen car. Another pointed out the way she carried herself, not with fear but with the calm strength of someone used to standing in control. Slowly, curiosity turned into quiet support. More phones were raised, recording every word, every gesture. The scene was no longer private, it was becoming public, with every angle captured. The officer grew impatient. He repeated his questions, his tone sharper, but her answers remained steady, unshaken. She provided her driver's license, her registration, each document lined up with meticulous order. Still, his doubt lingered. It wasn't about the papers anymore. It was about his unwillingness to believe what was right in front of him. Inside, she could feel the tension building like a storm waiting to break. She knew this moment wasn't only about her car. It was about something larger, about truth, authority, and the way justice was tested, not just in courts but out here, in everyday encounters. As the radio buzzed again, and the officer leaned in to hear the response. The judge's eyes locked on his. Something was about to shift. She could sense it. The air grew heavier, the silence of the crowd more intense. Whatever came next would decide not just the direction of the night, but the future of the man standing before her. The crackle of the radio echoed in the still night, and the officer stepped aside to listen carefully. His expression shifted for a split second, but he quickly masked it, turning back to the woman with the same rigid posture. He asked her to wait while he verified further details, his voice carrying the weight of control. Though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty, the woman noticed it, and so did the growing crowd. Still, she stood calm, her hands folded in front of her, her breathing steady. She had faced courtroom battles that had determined the fate of lives. This moment though personal, was another test of strength. As the tension lingered, the bystanders began to form their own stories. Some whispered about their own experiences, about moments where they too had been questioned unfairly. A young man at the edge of the crowd muttered that he once had been pulled over 3 times in a single week, driving his father's car. An older woman shook her head, saying it reminded her of the struggles she had faced years ago. Their voices weren't loud, but the murmurs created an invisible current of solidarity flowing toward the judge. The officer, unaware of the shift around him, walked back toward her with a clipboard, writing notes as if preparing a report. His authority seemed intact, but inside his mind, doubts were creeping in. He had expected the situation to be simple: another stop, another record checked, another box ticked. But the woman's calmness, her precision in every response, was unlike what he was used to. Something about her presence unsettled him, though he wouldn't admit it, not even to himself. At that moment, another subplot quietly unfolded. A teenager, recording the scene, texted the video to his older sister, who happened to be a journalist always on the lookout for stories about justice and accountability. She replied instantly, urging him to keep filming and send updates. What had begun as a routine stop was now one step closer to becoming a headline, though no one in the parking lot yet realized the scope of what was forming. The judge, though, outwardly unshaken, felt the weight of time pressing down. She thought about her colleagues at the courthouse, the cases waiting on her desk, the reputation she had built over decades. All of it now hung in a delicate balance with every decision this officer made. She reminded herself that this was more than an inconvenience, it was a test of the very principles she had dedicated her life to protecting. And as the officer paused again, pen hovering over his clipboard, the silence grew thicker. The crowd leaned in, the phones kept recording, and the woman's eyes never wavered. She knew something bigger was unfolding, and the outcome was still uncertain. The night was far from over, and the real turning point was still to come. The officer's pen finally touched the paper, his notes scribbled in quick, sharp strokes, as if he was trying to secure his authority through ink alone. The woman didn't move, though her heart thudded in her chest. The streetlights overhead cast long shadows, making the parking lot feel like a stage where every breath and every word carried weight. Around them, the crowd had grown larger. Strangers who had only come to shop or walk by now stood shoulder to shoulder, silent witnesses to something that felt bigger than just a traffic stop. The officer's radio buzzed again, louder this time, and he pressed it to his ear. His face shifted ever so slightly, a small crease of tension cutting across his brow. The woman noticed it instantly. Whatever message she had just received wasn't what he expected. Still, instead of backing down, he turned toward her and insisted she remain where she was until final confirmation came through. His words were firm, but his tone had lost some of the sharpness. For the first time, a sliver of hesitation cracked through his voice. The judge's mind raced. She knew the system inside and out. If the plates had come back clear, if her registration matched, why was he still pressing? Was this stubbornness, pride, or something more dangerous? Refusal to admit he might be wrong. Each second stretched longer, the air filled with both tension and the soft hum of murmurs from the crowd. The bystanders were no longer passive observers. They were expectant, almost waiting for the balance to tip one way or the other. A teenager in the front whispered that the video was already going viral online. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages as friends shared the clip across social media. The story was spreading faster than anyone there realized, and the officer's every move was under a microscope far beyond the parking lot. Yet in that moment, he seemed unaware of how big the stage had become. The judge's hands remained steady, though inside she felt the storm gathering. Years of discipline kept her calm, but the insult of being doubted, of being treated as less, pressed against her chest like a weight. She thought of the courtroom where she commanded respect with every word, and now she stood here, forced to defend her right to simply own her car. The officer took a step closer, his shadow falling across her. His jaw was set, but his eyes flickered with the smallest trace of uncertainty. The crowd inched forward, their silence more powerful than shouts. Every breath, every glance, every second had built to this moment. Something was about to break. The climax of the night was seconds away, but no one knew on whose side the scales of justice would fall. Just as the silence in the parking lot became almost unbearable, another police cruiser pulled in, its lights flashing against the rows of cars. The crowd shifted, whispering, their attention now split between the officer and the new arrival. From the second car stepped a sergeant, older, with a steady presence that immediately commanded the space. The original officer stiffened, his posture rigid, as if suddenly aware that his actions were no longer under his control alone. The woman's eyes followed the sergeant as he approached. She recognized him faintly. She had seen him once in court, standing at the back during a hearing. Whether he remembered her or not didn't matter now. What mattered was the weight his presence carried. The crowd sensed it too, leaning in as the sergeant asked calmly for an update. The younger officer's explanation came out quick and defensive, his words clipped, as though he needed to prove himself right before his superior could question him. The sergeant's expression didn't change, but his gaze shifted toward the woman. There was something in his eyes, an awareness, perhaps even recognition. But instead of addressing her directly, he asked for her documents once more, almost as if to test the consistency of her story. The crowd murmured louder, some shaking their heads at the unnecessary repetition. The tension, instead of easing, only tightened further. And then came the twist no one expected. Before the woman could respond, the sergeant's own radio buzzed with a sharp, clear message. The voice on the other end wasn't just confirming the car's registration, it was identifying its owner by name and profession. The words were unmistakable. Judge, followed by her full name. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. The younger officer's face drained of color, but the sergeant stayed stone still, his jaw tightening as if he were calculating his next move. The judge held her ground, her eyes fixed on them both. She could feel the tide shifting, but she also knew the danger wasn't over. Recognition did not always mean respect. If the sergeant chose to protect his officer instead of the truth, the night could turn even darker. The bystanders sensed it too. Their phones stayed raised, their silence charged with anticipation. The younger officer avoided her gaze, scribbling harder on his clipboard as if doubling down on his authority. The sergeant, however, lingered in that heavy pause, neither confirming nor correcting his subordinate. It was as if he was weighing loyalty against justice, pride against the undeniable truth now spoken over the radio. The crowd leaned closer, waiting. The woman's pulse quickened, her years of courtroom control clashing with the sting of being questioned on the street. The stakes were no longer about a car or a stop, they were about how far people would go to protect their power when the truth threatened to expose them. And at that very moment, the conflict deepened into something no one had anticipated. The sergeant finally turned fully toward the woman, his eyes narrowing as the weight of the radio's words hung heavy in the air. He cleared his throat and, in a measured tone, asked if she truly was Judge Daniels. The murmurs in the crowd swelled confirmation of what many had begun to suspect. She didn't flinch, didn't soften her voice, but calmly stated her name and title with the authority that had carried her through countless trials in the courtroom. The moment she spoke, the tension broke like a storm. The younger officer froze, his clipboard slipping slightly in his hand. His face, once rigid with confidence, was now pale with disbelief. He had accused a sitting judge of stealing her own car, and now the truth stood before him, undeniable and broadcast to dozens of recording phones. The sergeant's jaw tightened further, but he gave a slight nod to confirm what she said. Gasps rolled through the crowd, and the once silent bystanders erupted into low chatter, their whispers now laced with shock and outrage. The judge, however, did not raise her voice or demand an apology. Instead, she simply asked, in a calm but cutting tone, why her word and her documents had not been enough from the start. Her question wasn't just for the officer, it was for everyone listening, everyone recording, and everyone who would see the story play out later. The silence that followed her words was deafening. The officer stammered, his excuses falling flat, his authority unraveling with each unfinished sentence. The sergeant stepped in, trying to smooth the situation, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The crowd had witnessed not just the stop, but the refusal to believe, the persistence of doubt even when truth was presented, and with the confirmation of her identity, the balance of power shifted completely. The officer lowered his head, his career hanging in the balance as the weight of the moment bore down on him. Just as it seemed the story had reached its peak, the unexpected twist unfolded. From the back of the crowd, a man in plain clothes stepped forward, flashing a badge that revealed he was an investigator from Internal Affairs. He had been called to the scene after a report of misconduct had reached the department. The bystanders gasped again. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore, it was evidence. Everything recorded, every word spoken, was now part of an official review. The judge didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply nodded, knowing justice was finally in motion. The officer's career, once seemingly untouchable, was now hanging by a thread, not just in the court of public opinion, but inside the very system he had thought would protect him. The sergeant remained stone-faced, caught between his own silence and the undeniable truth laid bare. The night closed with the crowd dispersing slowly, their phones still buzzing with notifications. The judge walked back to her car with quiet dignity, her head held high. Justice had not only been served in the courtroom that day, it had found its way into the parking lot, leaving behind a lesson no one present would ever forget. The parking lot slowly emptied, but the echoes of what had happened lingered in the air. The judge sat behind the wheel of her car for a moment, letting the quiet wash over her. She had faced hostility before, but this was different. It had been public, raw, and undeniable. Yet instead of anger, she felt a deep sense of clarity. The truth had revealed itself, not through shouting or retaliation, but through patience and dignity. She knew people watching, both in person and on their screens, had witnessed more than a misunderstanding. They had witnessed a reminder of why fairness and accountability matter in every corner of society. The younger officer was escorted away by the sergeant and the Internal Affairs investigator. He didn't look back at the woman he had accused. His career, once steady, was unraveling in real time. Reports would be filed, investigations opened, and for once, the system he thought would protect him would now hold him accountable. The sergeant, though silent, knew this night would follow him too. his hesitation, his unwillingness to step in sooner, had been captured just as clearly as the officer's mistake. Meanwhile, the bystanders slowly dispersed, but not before sharing their thoughts among themselves. Some admitted they had doubted at first, others confessed the moment had forced them to think about times they had stayed silent when they should have spoken up. A young man who had filmed the entire encounter left with a newfound determination, realizing the power of truth captured on camera. For him, it was no longer just a viral video. It was a responsibility to share a story that carried meaning. The judge drove home in silence, her thoughts heavy but steady. She reflected on her journey, on how hard she had fought to sit on the bench, how many times she had been told she didn't belong, and how every trial had shaped her into the woman she was now. Tonight was not about a stolen car accusation. It was about the deeper struggle of being seen for who you truly are, without assumptions clouding the truth. In the days that followed, the story spread widely. News outlets covered it, not just as an incident, but as a conversation starter about trust, respect, and justice. The teenager's video was, and in many cases, learned. For the judge, life went on. She returned to her courtroom with the same quiet authority, though those who entered now looked at her with a deeper respect. She had faced a test outside the law's walls and had passed it not by wielding power, but by holding on to her principles. The final takeaway was simple, yet powerful. Dignity can outlast doubt, and truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deeply it is challenged. That night in the parking lot became more than just a confrontation. It became a story of resilience, accountability, and the unshakable strength of justice, reminding everyone that even in the smallest moments, integrity can change everything.